Welcome back to Infinite Podcast, everyone. So, we've got the Oscars, right? Started as a cozy dinner back in 1929, and now it's this colossal event watched by millions. It's wild, Simon, how insane the budgets are for these ceremonies, sometimes dwarfing what indie films even have to make their movies. Hollywood's big bash contrasts starkly with those gritty set-life realities. What's your take on that glitz-to-grit ratio?
Oh, for sure, Joe. The cash tossed around for those swanky Oscar parties could probably fund like 3 indie films. I picture some guy counting pennies to make his Arthouse dream come true, and meanwhile, across town, they're rolling out miles of red carpet that costs more than his whole movie. It's bananas. Hollywood's all about that sparkle until someone yells cut, then it's back to rehearsing lines in dingy dressing rooms.
It is bananas, but let's not forget the flip side. Those mega budgets and flashy shows can inspire. Sure, it's lavish, but the Oscars also put a spotlight on film as art. And while we're peeling back layers, isn't that indie filmmaker sparked by the same dreams? Yeah, they count pennies, but without the glam and visibility of big awards, would anyone outside their bubble even know about their film? The industry feeds on its own spectacle, for better or worse.
Absolutely, the Oscars can be a massive spotlight. But think about it, that glam can also blind us. We get so caught up in who's wearing what and who's snubbed whom that sometimes we miss real gems. Independent films often have more substance, right? Yet they're lost in the noise because they can't afford a ticket to the fancy dress party. Spectacle's got its place, but let's not let it outshine pure storytelling.
You've got a point about substance, Simon. Indies often pack a hefty storytelling punch. My beef is when people assume big budget equals no soul. That's not always the case. And let's face it, without the glam angle, would indie films even get a platform? The Oscars might be blinding with bling, but they also turn the spotlight onto others by setting a standard. Remember, sometimes sparkle isn't just distraction. It can be a beacon for all kinds of filmmakers to aspire to and exceed.
So you reckon the glitz of the Oscars, despite being over the top, actually gives those smaller flicks something to shoot for? Like they might get lost in the shuffle without the big bash paving the way?
Exactly, Simon. But on the flip side, the lavishness can create an unattainable mirage for indie creators. The Oscars showcase a standard that's often miles away from what indie budgets can achieve. It's like they're playing in different leagues, one financed by million-dollar campaigns and the other scraping by on passion and elbow grease. In that struggle for recognition, true talent can go unnoticed because it just can't glisten as brightly in the shadow of Hollywood's big-budget bling.
Hold up, Joe. Let's consider this. Sure, the Oscars are flashy, but they don't guarantee success either. A fat wallet for campaigns doesn't mean a film's soulful or even good. Plus, indie films have carved out their own niche. They dominate festivals, have a devout following, and platforms like Sundance give them that cred without Oscar-type glitz. They stand on storytelling, not spectacle. And sometimes they break through and land that spotlight on pure merit alone.
Well, Simon, it's a strange game, right? I mean, look, some of the best movies I've ever seen had no budget at all. And you take a movie that wins an Oscar, sometimes they're fantastic, other times you're sitting there going, how did this win? There's no direct correlation between money spent and the quality of the film. It's all about the story, the acting, the directing. Big budget or not, if you can make people feel something, that's the real win.
But hey, Joe, let's flip the script here. We rave about indie grit, but forget that big budgets often mean big risks. Studios drop millions, not just on glitz, but on tech, talent, and distribution to get us those epic scenes. Without those bucks, we wouldn't have groundbreaking visuals or grand-scale storytelling. Plus, a blockbuster win can bankroll fresh talent and new projects. It's a cycle. We need the cash splash of Oscar night to push boundaries in ways indies might not be able to.
All right, Simon, I'll bite. It's true, big budgets can turn scripts into visual masterpieces. But let's call it studios pumping money into tech and talent sometimes miss the heart. Look at when a CGI fest flops. Viewers crave connection, not just spectacle. And about funding fresh talent, it's a gamble if they're actually doing that or just betting on surefire hits to keep their pockets lined. Oscars might push some boundaries, but they also reinforce others. It becomes less about daring artistry and more about playing it safe for gold statues.
Come on, Joe. Playing it safe? Maybe that's true for some, but look at the underdogs and the surprise wins, those stories where somebody takes a wild idea and turns it into Oscar gold. Isn't that the ultimate proof that risk and innovation are still breathing in Tinseltown? Sure, you've got formulaic cash grabs, but every now and then, the system surprises us, rewarding boldness over blandness. The Oscars might not always get it right, but when they do, it's like David slinging Goliath with a golden statue.
Well, you're not wrong about those surprise wins. When the unexpected nominee snags an Oscar, it's a nod to risk-taking in cinema. We celebrate those moments because they feel like a victory for creativity over commercialism. Those underdog wins challenge the notion that Oscars just echo the same old big studio song. But consider this. For every dark horse triumphing at the Oscars, there are dozens of innovative works never even glimpsed by the Academy. So yeah, while Oscars can reward boldness, they often overlook it too.
Ah, that reminds me of this one time, right? I was at this local film fest, super small scale, Joe. This one filmmaker, a pal of mine, filmed a documentary with just her phone. Had more heart than half the blockbusters out there. She didn't win, not flashy enough, I guess. But in the audience, there was this well-known producer who later helped fund her next project. Proof that sometimes the shine of those ignored gems catches the right eyes. Kind of like those surprise Oscar moments we live for.
That's the magic of film, Simon. No glitz required, all about heart and hustle. Shows that talent can shine bright enough to catch the right eyes, regardless of budget size or festival flash.
Joe, speaking of heart and hustle, let's not fool ourselves. Oscar night's got more masks than a costume shop. There's a bunch of posturing, right? Actors and producers schmooze, pretending it's all about the art when they're really eyeing those endorsement deals and lead roles. And the smaller films, they often tug at our heartstrings from off stage because the big show is too busy with its smoke and mirrors routine to give them a real shot.
You're hitting a nerve there, Simon. It's wrenching to think about the raw passion behind indie films and then see them sidelined for the sake of industry politics and peacocking. Those backroom deals can really suck the soul out of what should be cinema's most heartfelt celebration.
True that, Joe. It's like they hang these indie filmmakers out to dry while the big wigs play musical chairs with the trophies. And beneath all those shiny masks and designer suits, well, we've got to wonder, what real stories are we missing out on while the Oscars keep playing their glitzy game of pretend?
You know what else is curious, Simon? How awards like the Oscars can create these false idols in art. We end up with this Oscar bait phenomenon where films are tailor-made for accolades, not for pushing the envelope. Do you think these statuettes steer creative expression into a sort of one-size-fits-all storytelling?
False idols? More like golden calves, Joe. And this Oscar bait thing, it's a trap. Suddenly, everyone's fishing with the same bait, aiming to hook those few judges. But here's the kicker. Who says they get to decide what's art and what's not? It's a popularity contest dressed up as high culture. The whole scene's basically whispering in creators' ears, play by our rules and you'll get gold. Forget breakthrough storytelling. If it doesn't fit the mold, it doesn't get rolled out on the red carpet.
Man, Simon, that hits home. It's disheartening to see originality shoved aside for formulaic narratives. When it's all about playing to the panel, we lose those authentic, daring voices, the ones that really have something to say. As a lover of stories and someone who thrives on that raw creative spirit, it's like watching a parade of potential just pass by, unseen because they didn't wear the right mask for the masquerade. It's a sad scene.
Joe, do you ever wonder what kind of groundbreaking films we're missing out on because those authentic voices get drowned out by the crowd chasing statuettes?
Whoa, Simon, that's a solid point. The chase for gold can definitely overshadow the raw, groundbreaking gems out there. It makes you think about all those unheard stories, doesn't it? Just imagine the innovative narratives we're missing because they didn't fit the mold. It really calls into question the true cost of these prestigious awards on creative diversity and genuine storytelling.
Absolutely, Joe. These prestigious awards put storytellers in a golden handcuff situation. Break free and you might strike gold with true innovation, or you could crash and burn without recognition. It's a gamble where playing it safe feels like the only bet. But instead of betting on sure shots for statues, what if we rolled the dice on the wildcard ideas? Those are the stories that rewrite the script on creativity, yet they're left scribbling in the margins while Oscar bait hogs the spotlight.
Man, Simon, the whole system, it's like a fight against genuine creativity. Remember when films made you think, this is something new? That's the stuff we need, not these carbon copy scripts chasing approval. It's about taking those shots in the dark where storytelling gets real. Some of the best conversations come from ideas that were just too out there for the mainstream. That's where the change happens, not in the echo chamber of award shows.
Absolutely, Joe. Talk about getting real, huh? So, what are your thoughts on how audiences can help shift the focus from those shiny awards to spotlighting these fresh, daring stories, changing the game?
It starts with the people, Simon. Audiences drive demand. If we champion diverse storytellers, seek out indie films, and use our platforms to shine a light on the underrated, then we push the industry toward genuine narrative innovation. It's about casting votes with our attention and wallets, showing love for the films that dare to be different. Critics, podcasters, even everyday tweeters, we've all got roles in changing what award-winning really means.
Joe, while I get what you're saying about audience power, honestly, we've got a mountain to climb here. The average Joe, no pun intended, isn't scouring the net for indie flicks. They're spoon-fed what's on the marquee or streaming homepage. And sure, we can clap for the underdogs till our hands hurt, but will that echo through Hollywood's halls? We gotta do more than vote with our wallets. We need a megaphone that reaches every corner office in Tinseltown. But hey, how about we start our own Infinite Awards right here on the podcast? Let's flip the script and spotlight those unsung heroes ourselves.
Starting our own Infinite Awards. Now there's a plot twist. But how do you see us really making an impact with it, Simon? How do we ensure those corners of Hollywood hear us and take the underdog seriously?
Hey, new listeners, you're tuned into the latest feud on Infinite Podcast. Do big awards like the Oscars stunt true creative storytelling? We've been jabbing at how Hollywood's shiny trophies can sideline raw cinema talent for cookie-cutter Oscar bait. And here's the kicker. We're stirring up our own ruckus with an idea. Infinite Awards to spotlight the brave filmmakers who break the mold and don't just dance to the tune of those flashy award shows. Stick around for this underdog tale.
Right, listeners. So what Simon and I are getting at is this. The current big award system can often ignore the most inventive stories in favor of those that tick familiar boxes. We want to challenge that with our Infinite Awards, where we celebrate the boundary pushers, the oddballs, the filmmakers brave enough to tell stories that might not fit the typical award show format, but deserve recognition for their originality and daring. It's about giving a voice to the voiceless in filmmaking.
So, Joe, this reminds me of a buddy of mine from back in the day, an indie filmmaker. This guy made a flick so out there, it was like nothing you've ever seen. Think talking goldfish granting wishes kind of weird. His film didn't get a nod from any festival, but man, did it have heart. It got me thinking, we're over here waiting for someone to give those stories a chance when maybe we should be the ones building the stage. Just like with our Infinite Awards idea, right? It's about giving those unconventional tales their overdue standing ovation.
Absolutely, Simon. But let's be real. Will our Infinite Awards really have the clout to spotlight those off-the-wall films like your buddy's Talking Goldfish movie? It's cool to champion them, sure. But the tough question we've got to ask ourselves is, can we get enough people to tune in and care? The industry is a giant machine, and sometimes it feels like we're throwing pebbles at a tank. It's all well and good to build a stage, but we need an audience that wants to see the show, and that getting people to actually watch might be our biggest hurdle yet.
You're hitting the nail on the head, Joe. It's like we're up against this colossal Hollywood beast with only our wit and a slingshot. I won't lie, it weighs heavy on me. Day in, day out, we pour our hearts into these conversations, hoping to light that spark for just one more person. The thought of fighting this industry Goliath, it's daunting. And honestly, sometimes it feels a little hopeless. But then I remember why we started Infinite Podcast. To give the little guy a loudspeaker. We've got to try, right? If not us, who will?
Totally, Simon. Let's lay it out. Hollywood juggernauts pump out films with massive budgets, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. The odds are stacked against the indie creators from the get-go. Looking at stats, less than 2% of the top box office hits are independent films. That's minuscule. The indie world is brimming with raw talent that just doesn't have the means to compete on that scale. Still, there's a shift happening. Streaming platforms are becoming game changers, allowing some indie films to bypass traditional routes and find an audience. Plus, social media gives voice to the unheard. Platforms like ours can highlight those hidden gems, no matter how quirky or offbeat they may be. Change is slow, but it's about persistence. And you're right, we've got to champion this cause because it matters, not just for film, but for the integrity of storytelling.
Joe, this reminds me of that one summer when I decided to build a treehouse in my backyard. Yeah, you heard that right. A grown man building a treehouse. Here's the thing. I didn't have the fancy tools or the big bucks some of my neighbors flaunted for their manicured lawns and Pinterest-perfect patios. But I was determined to make something with my own two hands. It was lopsided, had some nails sticking out, but it was mine. So, neighbor kids start coming over. They're curious about this rickety thing in the tree. And you know what? They loved it. They chose my treehouse over those perfect cookie-cutter swing sets next door. That's when it hit me. Sometimes raw, genuine effort resonates more than polished perfection. It's not the glossy finish that always counts. It's about having heart in what you create. Kind of like these indie filmmakers putting everything into their stories.
Simon, your treehouse tale is a spot-on metaphor for the indies punching above their weight. Big studio might shine their flicks to a glossy sheen, but they can't manufacture soul. And that's where the indie guys come in with their heart on their sleeves and grit in their teeth. Character of the work, that's what sticks with you, like those memories from a quirky treehouse. Indie films, they have character in spades. Makes you wonder how many more stories are out there waiting to be told, huh? Stories that break the mold and hit us where it really counts, right in the feels.
True that, Joe. But you know, even those polished Oscars can't escape the comedy of human error. Remember that epic mix-up when La La Land was mistakenly crowned Best Picture? I mean, talk about a plot twist suitable for Hollywood itself. It's moments like these that peel back the glamour and show us that, yep, even movie bigwigs can trip over their own shoelaces.
I know, right? That La La Land fiasco is the stuff of legends. It's like someone took a page out of a slapstick comedy and somehow it played out on the most prestigious stage in Hollywood. Yet that wasn't the only oops moment. Take way back to 1964 when Sammy Davis Jr. was handed the wrong envelope and announced the incorrect winner for music score. Or how about when Jennifer Lawrence famously took a tumble while climbing up the stairs to accept her Best Actress award in 2013? Those incidents bring a dose of reality to the gilded ceremony. Reminders that even A-listers are prone to real-life moments of goof-ups or missteps.
Absolutely hysterical, right? Hey, do you think these blunders, like J-Law's stumble to stardom or Sammy Davis Jr.'s mix-up melody, make the Oscars more relatable to folks at home? Like they're watching a live sitcom instead of just another awards show?
Well, Simon, I'd actually argue otherwise. While these moments are undeniably funny and humanizing, they might not necessarily make the Oscars more relatable. For most viewers, the Oscars are an escape, a night of glamour totally unlike our daily grind. A trip or a gaffe is good for a laugh, sure, but it's a brief flash where the facade cracks, not enough to bridge the gap between their world and ours. Even with these bloopers, Hollywood's Royal Ball still feels a universe away from our couches.
Right, Joe, I see where you're coming from. It's like these blunders add a sprinkling of chaos into an otherwise predictable night. Makes us sit up and say, hey, stars are just like us. But when the laughter dies down, we're still staring at a screen that's worlds apart from our living rooms. The Oscars spectacle is part charm, part untouchable fantasy. It thrives on being out of reach. The mistakes, they're just momentary glitches in the matrix.
That's exactly it. Those glitches, they crack open the door to a more human side of Tinseltown for a split second, but then the show goes on, and it's back to business as usual. It's that contrast between the rehearsed perfection versus those unscripted instances that make us chuckle and point before we're swept away again by the next shiny presentation or heartfelt speech. Really, these blunders don't change the core of what the Oscars are, a showcase of cinematic prestige where even the mishaps are wrapped in luxury. Talk about an exclusive blooper reel, one that only airs once a year.
Oh, but come on, Joe. Exclusive or not, these Oscar misfires give us commoners a few golden nuggets of joy. Like when someone trips at the ceremony, and for a moment, they're just like your clumsy uncle at Thanksgiving. Or when they read the wrong name, it's like the rest of us mixing up appointments. Sure, their screw-ups are in designer gowns with millions watching, but they're goofballs nonetheless. I reckon those bloopers do more than entertain. They yank these stars from their pedestals and plunk them down next to us, even if it's just while we're all laughing together.
Yeah, Simon, they're goofballs on an epic scale. But do you think these blunders have any lasting impact on how we view the celebs who trip up, or is it all just forgotten once the after parties kick off?
Oh, Joe, you bet they're remembered, like that time you accidentally wore your mom's jeans to school. Sure, everybody laughs it off, and then next thing, it's all trendy. Before you know it, every dude's rocking the high-waisted look. I'm just saying, J-Law falls in Dior. Suddenly we're all practicing our stair descending with a touch of grace and two left feet. Lasting impact? Man, they practically set the new standard for entrance moves.
Ha, fair enough, Simon. Mistakes like those, they turn into this weird badge of honor, an inside joke for the whole world to share. It's kind of like when a fighter gets knocked down in the ring but then stands back up. Everyone respects the comeback even more than if they'd never been hit. So you stumble on stage or mangle an announcement, that's when real character shines through. Plus, let's be honest, it's way more fun to talk about the trips and facepalms than who wore what designer.
For sure, Joe. It's those stumbles and flubs that make the Oscars relatable and honestly unforgettable. They show us the humanity in our heroes. Who knew we'd find more to admire in their ability to shake off a spill than to deliver a perfect scene? The real question is, what blunder are we going to be talking about after the next Oscars, huh?
Talking about blunders and the humanity behind them, it makes me think. Not every Oscar night slip-up is a literal fall from grace. Sometimes the camera cuts away and we miss the letdowns happening off stage. I've heard stories about nominees who prep victory speeches only to return home with nothing but a good-to-be-nominated pat on the back. That's some psychological tightrope, Simon. Dressing up your hopes in black tie just to watch them get disinvited from the winner's circle. What's your take on that side of the Oscars?
Ah, man, Joe, that's brutal. You're saying these folks rehearse their thank yous, practice their shock face in the mirror, and then, bam, it's all for nothing? Talk about a punch to the gut. Kinda makes you wonder if chasing that golden guy is worth it when it could end in such a silent kind of heartbreak, huh? Makes the whole shindig feel like one big, glittering illusion.
Absolutely, Simon. The pressure to win that statue must be intense. So how do you reckon they deal with it? Do you think their sense of self-worth gets totally wrapped up in that moment, or can they shake it off?
Hey, newcomers. You're tuning into Infinite Podcast with Joe and me, Simon. We've been dishing out the lesser-seen side of the Oscars, those behind-the-scenes heartaches where hopes are dressed to the nines, but the night doesn't go as planned. Yup, we're talking about the heavy weight on the shoulders of those who sit there ready to leap up and snag that golden statue, only to end up clapping for someone else. It's that unseen drama off camera, the tough act of keeping a smile while your dream trophy slips away. Stick around as we peel back the curtain on Hollywood's glitziest illusion and see what's really at stake.
Sure, that curtain call without a trophy is tough, but on the flip side, Simon, getting nominated for an Oscar is no small feat. Think about it. Just to be in that room, You're recognized as one of the best in the world at your craft. That's a massive win in itself. And these nominees often see a boost in their careers post-nomination, regardless of winning. Their work gets a spotlight and opportunities flow in. So yeah, they may not take home the statue, but their invite to the dance has already set them apart. Maybe the real shimmer of Oscar night isn't the gold of the statuette, but the golden opportunity that nomination itself represents.
You're spot on, Joe. Reminds me of my cousin Vinny. Yeah, the one with the 80s hairband tribute act. They scored an invite to open for this huge band, right? Place was packed. Didn't land the record deal he dreamt of, but man, the crowd went wild for them. Next thing you know, they're booked out for months. So it's that shot at playing the big league, just like getting an Oscar nod, that can flip the script. Winning's great, but sometimes just playing in the game amps up your scene in ways you never expected.
Absolutely, Simon. Vinny's story is spot on. It's about seizing that moment in the spotlight. So what do you think? Is it truly the taking part in these big events that counts more than the winning?
Think about it, Joe. It's like me showing up to the hottest potluck with my infamous bean dip. I might not win Best Dish, but everyone's going to remember that dip. The Oscars are like that. You show up with your best work. You've already spiced things up in Hollywood. Nominees, they're stirring the pot just by being on that list. Win or lose, their name's out there, and like a good bean dip, people come back for more. Winning is sweet, sure, but getting a taste of the big time, that's its own flavor of success.
I get the bean dip analogy, Simon, but let's flip the script. Being nominated sets a bar, right? So what happens after the Oscars, win or lose? Where do you go from there? Peaks and valleys, my friend. Some might ride the nomination wave, sure, but others could feel like they've peaked at that potluck and it's all stale chips from then on. Remember, high visibility means higher expectations next time. That pressure cooker doesn't always lead to another gourmet dish. What if our Oscar nominees are just one-hit wonders waiting to happen?
Joe, this brings me back to my high school rock band days. We somehow landed a gig at the town's biggest festival, Pure Luck. The crowd went nuts for our cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit. We were local heroes for a minute. But after that, talk about pressure. Every garage jam felt heavy, like we had to top ourselves or bust. In the end, we split before graduation. Reminds me of these nominees' plight. Hit that high note early, and what's next might feel like an encore you didn't prepare for. Pressure's a tricky beast, ain't it?
Man, that hits close to home, Simon. Pouring your heart into something, getting that rush of success, just to wonder if it was a one-time deal, it's gut-wrenching. I can only imagine for these artists at the Oscars, after their big moment, whether they win or not, that echo of what now has got to haunt them. We've both felt it, that weighty expectation, the fear of being a flash in the pan. It's sobering, really makes you think about what success means and how fleeting it can be.
You're hitting the nail, Joe. That lingering question, what now? It can haunt anyone who's tasted the spotlight. It's wild, isn't it, how one night at the Oscars can lay down the gauntlet for what's to come in an artist's life. Makes you really ponder on success and its shadows. I mean, once you've danced in that light, how do you keep the music playing? What do you folks think? Is securing a spot in Oscar history enough, or is it just the start of a bigger artistic quest?
Speaking of that bigger artistic quest, Simon, it brings to mind the world of indie cinema. Away from the Oscar stage and its grandeur, there's this whole other universe. Indie films. Now there's a realm where success isn't measured by gold statues or even box office blowouts, but by storytelling guts and creative gumption. It's less about the glitz, more about grit, right? What do you make of those indie underdogs that manage to outshine their budget, making waves with nothing but raw innovation and heart?
Joe, diving into indie films is like unearthing treasure at a flea market. These flicks, they're not backed by big studio bucks or flashy marketing. Success here? It's all about hitting the right chords with the audience, telling those raw, unfiltered stories that big Hollywood wouldn't touch with a 10-foot boom mic. Take Paranormal Activity, made on a shoestring, scared the pants off viewers everywhere. Profit through the roof. Or Moonlight. Hello? Crashed the Oscar scene and nabbed Best Picture. That's indie gold. These gems, they thrive on creativity, not cash. Word of mouth, that's their weapon. Social media buzz, that's their red carpet. Film festivals, launch pads for these under-the-radar rockets. Indies redefine success, one genuine, heartfelt narrative at a time, and I'm all in for that ride.
Absolutely, Moonlight was a game changer. But what do you think makes the audience connect so deeply with these indie stories? Is it the raw authenticity that contrasts with often formulaic blockbusters, or something else entirely?
You ever notice how indie films are like that one uncle who shows up to Thanksgiving in a velvet tracksuit? He's not flashy like your other uncles with their big old Rolex watches, but man, he's got stories that'll knock your socks off. That's indie cinema. It hits you with this realness that sticks to your ribs like grandma's mashed potatoes. Mainstream movies, they're like that predictable green bean casserole. Looks good, but tastes the same every year.
That's one way to put it, but hold up, Simon. Are we not glamorizing indie films a bit much? Sure, they're unique and heartfelt, but sometimes that uncle's stories ramble on without really hitting the mark. Not all indies are these hidden gems. Some end up being hype machines, cashing in on that undiscovered vibe. And let's be real, isn't success still ultimately about finding an audience and making dough? Remember, some of these so-called indies are backed by boutique arms of big studios. They've just mastered that indie aesthetic while playing the same game.
You know, Joe, you got a solid point. It punches me right in the gut when those indie-looking flicks are just wolves in sheep's clothing, churned out by big studio offshoots. It dilutes the whole spirit of indie cinema, the hustle, the scrappy innovation. Real indie films, they've got this heart that beats loud against all odds. When a true indie film breaks through, it's magic. But if it's just hiding behind an independent label with a major studio lurking in the credits, that feels like biting into what you think is homemade pie, only to find out it's store-bought. Just leaves a sour taste, man.
Yes, Simon, that's rough. When you root for the underdog only to discover they've got a heavyweight in their corner, it's disheartening, man. You want to believe in these raw tales, in the sweat and tears poured into them, only to find out it's been a setup. That stings. It sucks out a bit of the joy and authenticity we crave from indie cinema, robbing us of that organic connection. Makes you skeptical, which is a shame because when you come across the real deal, it hits differently, right in the feels.
Joe, true that. It's like finding a kick-ass band on some rundown bar stage, only to realize they've been signed and polished by a major record label. Kinda kills the vibe, you know? We crave that raw connection with indie films because they're supposed to be digging deep, away from the glittery claws of Hollywood. But let me stir the pot a bit here. Isn't the real kicker how we, the audience, eat it all up? We love to romanticize the idea of indie, draping it in this mystique of purity and passion. When we find out there's big money behind it, suddenly it's less indie and more poser. Yet doesn't success in indie actually need that blend of heart and financial smarts to hit us in the feels and survive the business? After all, at the end of the day, cinema's part art, part hustle.
Hey newcomers, welcome to the debate of indie cinema's heart and soul. We've been unpacking how these hidden gem films captivate us with their authentic stories, far from Hollywood's glossy blockbusters. We talked about indie hits like Paranormal Activity and Moonlight, which worked wonders with shoestring budgets and creative freedom. But then we hit a snag. Some so-called indie movies are just big studio projects in disguise. It's a complex landscape where underground meets commercial, yet genuine indie spirit manages to keep things real in a world full of posers. Stick around as we keep dissecting the indie film scene.
Right on, let's sprinkle some more facts into this indie mix. Indie films often operate with much leaner resources compared to their blockbuster counterparts. For instance, the average budget for a major studio film can easily reach upwards of $100 million, while an indie film might play ball with anything from a shoestring budget of, say, $50,000 to maybe a few million bucks. These indie projects are typically funded through independent investors or crowdfunding efforts. Think platforms like Kickstarter, where everyday folks can pitch in. And here's a cool tidbit. Digital technology has been a total game changer for indies. Back in the day, shooting on film could gobble up cash faster than a kid in a candy store. Now, digital makes it way more affordable to get those cinematic dreams out of your head and onto the screen. Oh, and let's talk about distribution. Indies used to struggle big time to find screens willing to show them. Now, the streaming revolution has flung open the gates. Services like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, they're giving these flicks a cozy home where they can kick up their feet and get watched by millions without having to fight for a spot at the multiplex. So while we chew on whether an indie film is staying true to its roots or getting tangled up in the mainstream vine, remember, it's a brave new world out there, full of possibilities for filmmakers who've got the grit, the gumption, and now, thanks to technology and new platforms, the chance to shine.
But let's not forget, Simon, these streaming platforms, while giving indie films a stage, are also creating a new battlefield. A flick might land on Netflix, sure, but it's now jostling for attention amongst thousands of others, including those glossy blockbusters. So the question is, does this level the playing field, or just make it tougher for true indies to get eyeballs on their art?
You've got it nailed down, Joe. It's like dropping a dozen different flavored donuts in front of someone and saying pick one. Choice is great, but too much. And how does the real delicious, one-of-a-kind indie donut with heart stand out from the glitzy mass-produced ones?
These indie films, Simon, are like those donuts, some truly homemade and irresistible, while others have that factory-made taste. As the selection keeps growing, it'll be interesting to see how these original voices stay loud and clear in the crowd. What will be the next Moonlight? It's a delicious mystery. What do you listeners think? How should indie cinema carve out its space amidst this streaming gold rush?
So, diving deeper into the indie scene, let's chat about those true labor of love projects, micro-budget masterpieces. Think of Rodriguez's El Mariachi or Kevin Smith's Clerks. These films had tighter belts than a pair of skinny jeans at Thanksgiving dinner, but still managed to become cult classics. Now, Joe, in your opinion, do these razor-thin budgets clip the wings of creativity, or do they actually fuel filmmakers to innovate and fly higher?
Not at all, Simon. Tight budgets often force filmmakers to think outside the box. You've got El Mariachi. Rodriguez made that for about $7,000. He had to get creative with every aspect, using local talent and even wheelchairs for tracking shots. And Clerks, shot for a modest $27,000, and it's still a touchstone in indie filmmaking lore. They embrace limitations, stripped down to storytelling essentials, dialogue, characters, passion. Today, digital tech has slashed the cost of entry. Filmmakers use smartphones to shoot films. Editing software is right on their laptops. These constraints aren't hurdles, they're launch pads for creativity. Just look at the success stories popping out from film festivals worldwide.
Whoa, Rodriguez whipped up El Mariachi for just $7,000? That's less than most folks drop on a used car. And Clerks? $27,000? My brain's doing backflips here, Joe. These guys are like MacGyver in the filmmaking world. Give them a paperclip and some bubblegum, and boom, you've got cinematic dynamite. Mind-blowing how they squeeze out every drop of creativity from a dollar bill. It's not about what you've got, it's all about that gritty passion to tell your story, no matter what.
True, they did more with less, but let's not slap on the rose-colored glasses just yet. Innovation isn't a direct product of empty pockets. It can just as easily breed frustration and compromise as it can genius. These success stories are outliers. For every El Mariachi, there's a heap of indie attempts that couldn't make it work on fumes. And while passion is key, it doesn't always pay the bills or get quality on screen. We're in an age where good enough won't cut it, even for indies. Sure, constraints can spark creativity, but they also raise the risk of burning out trying to light the fire in the first place.
Man, Joe, that's a heavy hit of truth. It stings a bit, thinking about those countless filmmakers pouring their hearts and souls into projects. They're hustling, scraping pennies together, only to see their dreams snuffed out because they just couldn't break through the static. It gets me right in the chest. We champion these underdogs like El Mariachi, but that's one sparkler in a dark sky full of folks with extinguished flames. There's passion, yeah, but at the end of the day, Passion's gotta eat, it's gotta pay rent, and if it doesn't get at least a nod from Lady Luck, it's rough out there. Tough to chew on, buddy.
You know, Simon, sometimes I think filmmakers with minuscule budgets are like someone trying to cook a five-star meal with just a microwave and a pack of ramen. Sure, you might end up with something surprisingly tasty, or your kitchen's a disaster zone. Just proves creativity in the film industry ain't just about cooking up stories, it's about cooking them under all kinds of crazy conditions.
Absolutely, Joe. Tossing in some facts. Rodriguez, while making El Mariachi, not only directed, but also took up duties as a cinematographer, editor, and more. Smith sold his comic book collection to help fund Clerks and shot the film at the convenience store where he worked. These aren't just stories, they are perfect examples of constraint breeding innovation. The director's limitations became their toolkit. For today's filmmakers, digital has democratized filmmaking. With a decent smartphone and free editing software, anyone can produce a film. Crowdfunding on platforms like Indiegogo gives these indie chefs the ingredients they need to avoid that microwave ramen fate. Plus, shooting with natural light, real locations, and a tiny crew, or even using non-actors, can not only save money, but also bring an authentic flavor to their five-star meal. It's all about harnessing every resource, squeezing the potential out of every challenge, and serving up something scrumptious against the odds.
Sure, digital tech's democratized filmmaking, but let's not throw a parade just yet. Every Tom, Dick, and Harriet with a smartphone thinks they're the next indie sensation. Markets flooded. It's tougher than ever to stand out from the crowd of look-at-me content. And crowdfunding isn't some magic piggy bank. For every successful campaign, dozens fizzle out. Even though Rodriguez and Smith turned their limitations into iconic films, that's like winning the lottery. A powerful story is key, but so is knowing how to sell it. Indie filmmaking's less about what camera you've got and more about hustling your vision to audiences drowning in choice. It's gritty, yeah, but without business smarts and marketing savvy, that authentic flavor might never get tasted.
Right, Joe. Breaking it down, even with digital's helping hand, a filmmaker's journey is like climbing Mount Everest in flip-flops, possible but insanely challenging. Getting savvy with social media, understanding your niche audience, and actually mastering the art of storytelling are essential survival tools. Sure, going viral can happen if you hit that sweet spot of originality and relatability. It's like catching lightning in a bottle. And let's not forget film festivals. They're like the cool kids' table where everyone wants a seat. They can be a launchpad for micro-budget flicks, getting them in front of critics and distributors who can push them into the limelight. Bottom line, resourcefulness beyond the camera goes a long way in making these wallet-light projects soar.
Even so, Simon, think about it. The thrill of creating something from almost nothing, that's the ultimate indie flex. These no-budget wonders aren't just films. They're acts of sheer willpower. Nail it, and you aren't just a director, you're a magician pulling rabbits out of empty hats. Now, listeners, ever dreamed of shooting your own indie film? What's stopping you from taking that leap with today's tech at your fingertips? Let us know what you'd create with just imagination and grit.
Ever dreamed of shooting my own indie film? Heck, Joe, I've got enough weird family drama to make a trilogy, and with my Uncle Terry's wonky eye, we'd only need one special effect.
Haha, sounds like Uncle Terry's quite the character. But seriously, Simon, if you were to turn that family drama into an indie movie, which part of your saga do you reckon would hook the audience most? And would you cast a professional actor for Uncle Terry, or just let his wonky eye steal the show?
Well, diving into the family chronicles for film material sounds tempting, Joe, but let's pump the brakes. Not everyone's cut out for turning their personal circus into cinema. I mean, while raw life stories can be gold, a good flick needs structure, acts, arcs, the whole shebang. And casting? Professional actors give depth. Uncle Terry, bless him, might just end up a one-trick pony with his eye doing all the acting. Let's face it, real life is messy, unwieldy, and seldom fits neatly into a screenplay without some serious crafting.
No doubt, Simon. Crafting a film from personal experiences demands a delicate balance. But that's the beauty of indie filmmaking. turning life's messiness into art with a raw edge. So to all the aspiring filmmakers wrestling with their own version of Uncle Terry, remember, your unique story could be the next indie hit. Just need to mold those real-life quirks into a narrative that resonates. And on that note, what do you folks think? Would love to hear about the real-life tales you'd like to adapt for the big screen.
And talking about real-life quirkiness, Joe, let's face it, the indie film set is basically a blooper reel in progress. You've got to have a sense of humor when you're dodging cops because you didn't get a permit to shoot, or when your lead actor forgets his lines and accidentally creates a catchphrase that makes it into indie movie history. It's like everyday's April Fools with zero budget for pranks.
Exactly, Simon. Like that story of the boom operator who sneezed during a funeral scene, and it turned out so funny they kept it in. It's those unplanned moments that often become fan favorites. There's an organic comedy to indie sets. It's the charm amidst chaos. Hearing quiet on set when you're shooting next to a bustling highway, that's pure comedic gold. You don't get that raw spontaneity in big-budget films where everything's storyboarded to within an inch of its life. And hey, listeners, ever witnessed hilarious behind-the-scenes antics or happy accidents? Do tell.
Definitely, Joe. So if we're spotlighting those unexpected gems, what's your take on actors going improv mid-scene because maybe they forgot a line or there was some wacky distraction? Any memorable moments where that on-the-fly creativity turned into something brilliant on an indie set?
Well, Simon, improv can be hit or miss. Remember, just because an actor goes off script doesn't always mean it's gold. It takes skill to make something spontaneous fit the tone of the film and push the story forward. While some actors thrive on improv, look at what Robin Williams did in his films. True gems are rare. Directors often have to sift through a lot of chaff to find those moments worth keeping. Improv needs the right context. Otherwise, it can derail scenes and confuse the storyline.
Ah, Joe, you're spot on about improv. So funny story, I was helping out on this indie set, the kind where duct tape's the MVP. We had this actor, let's call him Jimmy, who fancied himself the next Marlon Brando. Well, we're shooting a tense dinner scene. Low budget means grandma's dining room. And right as Jimmy delivers his emotionally charged monologue, the family cat leaps onto the table and faceplants into the mashed potatoes. Instead of cutting, Jimmy rolls with it, gives this heartfelt speech to the cat, tears and all. We were dying, man. The director loved it so much he kept the take. Sure, improv can derail a scene, but sometimes you just gotta embrace the chaos and hope your actor's ready to duel with a cat for the spotlight.
Haha, that's a classic, Simon. Cats are the uncontested kings of unpredictability. In indie filmmaking, it's all about rolling with those punches, or paw slaps. See, you get these unintended moments of brilliance when actors like Jimmy can pivot and elevate a scene with quick thinking. These unplanned blips add authenticity you can't script. Authenticity, man, it can turn a mundane shoot into indie gold. Listeners, we want to hear from you. What's been your most memorable cat leaping into mashed potatoes kind of moment? Whether in life or on screen, share those bloopers with us.
So Joe, you've hit the nail on the head about authenticity. Speaking of which, how do you reckon an indie filmmaker can strike that balance between keeping things genuine and not letting the set descend into total anarchy when those wildcard moments happen?
Well, Simon, it's like being a tightrope walker at the circus. You've got to have a steady hand and laser focus while knowing when to let the performers, actors in this case, stray a bit for those gasps from the crowd. Setting clear boundaries and having a solid script are key, but so is flexibility. If you're too rigid, you stifle creativity. Too loose, and you lose control. Filmmaking is a dance between order and chaos. Directors need that instinct to know when to let a scene breathe and when to reel it back in. Now, for our fellow indie film lovers, ever seen a movie where it felt just too wild or impressively balanced? Tell us about it.
Oh man, Joe, this one indie I saw was like if a raccoon got hold of a camera, pure untamed energy. Every scene was like, is this genius or did someone leave the lens cap on? The lead actor's hair changed lengths every other shot. Continuity? More like a continuity of chaos, brother.
I feel that on a spiritual level, Simon. When continuity takes a back seat to a raccoon-style filmmaking frenzy, you're in for a wild ride. That so bad it's good vibe can be irresistible. Those films grab you because they break all the rules with such heart. Being part of this indie world, it's exhilarating and maddening all at once, knowing each take could be either disastrous or brilliant. Now that's passion for cinema. Makes me laugh just thinking about these happy disasters we secretly love. What about you guys? Ever have a good chuckle at those not-so-smooth production snags?
Ah, Joe, in the throes of guerrilla filmmaking, the line between disaster and brilliance can get real blurry. Take Robert Rodriguez, who made El Mariachi for about $7,000. He was notorious for using whatever he had on hand, which led to all kinds of improv on set. Then you've got the Blair Witch Project. They used unknown actors and loose scripting, which resulted in genuine reactions that defined the horror genre. These bloopers and improvised moments weren't just funny, but they reshaped how we see indie films, rough around the edges, but with a heart of cinematic gold. Makes you think, without these risks and happy accidents, some cult classics might have just been forgettable flops.
For sure, Simon. Those rough edges and on-the-fly decisions are really what give indie films their unique flavor, bloopers included. They might not all turn into El Mariachi or the Blair Witch Project, but they definitely leave a mark. I love thinking that somewhere out there is another indie set ripe for the next happy accident or brilliant improv that we'll be talking about in years to come. Makes me wonder what future cult classic is being botched together right this second. Let's hear those predictions, folks.
You know, Joe, all this banter about indie film chaos actually kind of paints the bigger picture. I mean, these directors, they're like authoring their life's book, page by chaotic page. It got me thinking about auteur filmmakers who take on the Herculean task of writing, directing, producing, often even more. They have such a distinctive mark on their work. It's like every frame's crying out loud with personal stories and whatnot. It's that whole auteur theory in motion, so to speak.
You know, Simon, reminds me of the time I met a director at a film festival, a real purist. This guy was all in. He sold his car to fund his movie. There he was, this one-man army, writer, director, editor, pouring his soul onto the screen. The kicker? His film was this raw, visceral look at loneliness in the digital age. Completely self-funded and self-made, his style oozed individuality. It couldn't have been anyone else's creation but his. I see that as the essence of the auteur awakening. It's not just storytelling, it's soul-bearing. When these auteurs craft their works, they aren't making movies. They're charting maps of their inner landscapes for us to explore. And that's brave. It's an invitation into the most personal corners of their minds, shaping not just films, but the very dialogue of global cinema consciousness.
But here's the flip side, Joe. While auteurs are crafting these deeply personal stories, aren't they sometimes also shackled by their own vision? They're like sailors navigating without a compass. Sure, you get some genius works, but then there's the ego trap, right? When does that staunch independence cross over from being authentic storytelling to just self-indulgent noise? We love the Nolans and Tarantinos for their unique styles, but this auteur awakening, it's a tightrope walk above a sea of obscurity. Are these passionate creators tapping into the collective heartbeat, or are they just whispering into the void? Listeners, weigh in with your thoughts. Do these solo journeys enrich our global cinema, or could they be narrowing the lens too much?
Absolutely, Simon. It's quite the paradox. I grapple with that too. There's something deeply human about wanting your singular vision to be heard, to echo through the halls of cinema. But it's a fine line between visionary and narcissist. Finding the balance is tough. It really is. These auteurs pour their heart into every frame. Sometimes it's genius, other times it's, let's just say, not for everyone. It hits me hard because while I resonate with that urge to create something so intensely personal, we've all seen when it goes south. Indulgent? Possibly. But without those risks, we'd never have the masterpieces that do manage to strike a chord within us all. Sometimes, though, you're right. It's like watching them sail without a compass, lost in their own sea. They might find new lands or just drift endlessly. It can get lonely out there, putting bits of your soul up for public consumption with no guarantee it will resonate. It makes their attempts all the more courageous, doesn't it? To our listeners, ever feel torn between admiring an artist's staunch vision and feeling like they've drifted off course?
Man, Joe, I'm convinced the next great indie auteur is somewhere out there right now, probably filming with an old smartphone and a table lamp for dramatic lighting. Who knows? That DIY masterpiece might just be the one to redefine cinema as we know it.
Simon, that's spot on. Smartphone filmmaking is no longer a novelty. It's a legitimate medium for auteurs breaking into the scene. Look at Sean Baker's Tangerine, shot entirely on an iPhone 5s. Talk about game-changing. And consider Steven Soderbergh embracing iPhones for Unsane and High-Flying Bird. These guys are proving the democratization of film. The tools for revolutionary storytelling are, quite literally, in our pockets. Statistics show that mobile devices now account for over half of video content consumed globally. Filmmakers leveraging this trend can tap into vast audiences without Hollywood budgets. The potential here? It's huge. This shift isn't just technological, but philosophical, fostering a new breed of filmmakers who speak directly to and from the human experience with minimal barriers. Their films aren't just watched, they're felt. Who'll harness this evolving landscape next? It's anyone's guess, and that's exciting.
Oh boy, Joe. Just picturing the next big thing being filmed at a laundromat with nothing but passion and pocket lint. It's the Wild West out there in the indie scene, my man.
Speaking of the Wild West, Simon, that brings us to another territory in film where reality and storytelling collide. Documentaries. They're like the frontier towns of cinema, places where facts meet narrative, and sometimes there's a standoff. Filmmakers walk this fine line between telling a compelling story and honoring the truth. Just makes you wonder, what happens when they take too much artistic license? Are they reshaping reality or just trimming the edges for a better fit? It's one thing to round out a doc with strong storytelling, but another when creative liberties steer us away from the cold, hard facts.
Oh man, Joe, I've got to jump in here. 'Cause let's face it, some of these documentaries, they're more drama than docu. They play fast and loose with the facts like a card shark at a Vegas table. Case in point, remember Super Size Me? That guy turned eating burgers into an alarm bell for obesity. But how much was truth and how much was just a well-dressed-up narrative? I mean, watching him chow down was wild, but did it really represent the average experience? Here's the deal. When these films bend reality to tell a story, doesn't that twist the viewer's perception too? You get hooked, sure, but then you're riding their merry-go-round thinking it's straight shooting. Filmmakers have this power to hold up a mirror to society, but when the reflection's all warped, do we end up seeing ourselves or just the distortions? There's got to be a checkpoint, right? Keep 'em honest, keep 'em true, even if the truth isn't always cinema gold.
Absolutely, Simon. You're hitting the nail on the head with Super Size Me. There's that provocative angle pulling you in, but then it begs the question, how much of it truly mirrored the typical fast food experience versus being tailored for shock value? How do you reckon we draw the line between impactful storytelling and responsible journalism when it comes to documentaries?
Documentaries with too much spice? No way, man. Are we talking about flicks bending the truth like a spoon in one of those street magic shows? That's some slippery slope. How do folks know what to believe when the line between fact and fiction gets blurry? That's dodgy territory, if you ask me.
Right? It's like walking on ice, thin sometimes. Documentaries have this aura of trust about them because, hey, it's real life, right? Well, not always. When filmmakers go heavy on the drama, you have to wonder, are we getting the truth or just their truth? The last thing we want is a documentary that's masquerading as fact when it's dipping into fiction. We need that solid ground of truth to stand on, especially in a world where facts are your lifeline. Viewers deserve the real deal, even if it's less theatrical.
Sure, Joe, real life's got enough drama without having to slap on extra makeup, am I right? I mean, just look around you. Truth is stranger than fiction most days. But when a documentary director starts getting all Hollywood, sprucing up the place with fancy narrative tricks, well, that's where I draw the line. You can't be playing dress up with reality. Viewers catch on, and then trust goes out the window faster than a cat in a bath. We want the facts with a side of human experience. Hold the fairy dust, please.
You couldn't be more right. In documentary filmmaking, trust is key. Once it's broken, good luck rebuilding that bridge. We're talking about a genre that dates back to the 1890s, with works like Nanook of the North in the early 20th century that already faced scrutiny over staging elements. More recently, you've got Michael Moore's films that stir the pot, facing criticism for manipulating timelines or leaving out context. These examples illuminate the tightrope filmmakers walk, sticking to facts while weaving an engaging story. The presence of facts alone doesn't ensure accuracy. How they're presented matters just as much, including what's left out. Filmmakers must balance the craft without compromising integrity, because when we dive into these films, we're coming for lessons in truth, not a plunge into deception. It's all about perspective without distortion, letting reality tell its own compelling story.
Well, heck, Joe. Talk about a reality check. Sometimes these documentary folks are like that one friend we all have who can't tell a story straight. They start with a trip to the grocery store, and by the end of it, they've wrestled an alligator in aisle 5. I mean, sure, it's a great tale, but brother, I just wanted to know if you got the milk on sale.
Ha, exactly. And it's not just about the milk, right? Some of these documentaries have the potential to genuinely influence public opinion and policy. If you're wrestling alligators in your narrative, you better actually be Steve Irwin, otherwise, what's the point? Here's the twist. Yes, documentary filmmakers should strive for truth, but they also have to sell seats or get streams. So it becomes this juggling act. How do we keep a story engaging without chuck-upping facts out the window? It's key that every fact checks out, because if credibility is lost, so is the documentary's power to enact change. The real head-scratcher for viewers is sorting the wheat from the chaff. Being critical viewers who question what we see is crucial. Otherwise, those alligators might as well be dragons, and we've crossed into fantasy land. What do you think, listeners? How much alligator wrestling are you willing to accept in your docs?
You nailed it yet again, Joe. It really does hit me in the feels. Truth matters. These stories shape how we see the world, how we understand each other's struggles. When that gets twisted, it's like someone's pulling wool over our eyes, and to be honest, it feels lousy. The stakes are sky high when documentaries have the power to sway hearts and minds. If we wanted fiction, we'd be watching superheroes battling it out, not a film claiming to show real life. Trust is a two-way street. Without it, what have we got left? It's about respect, man. Respecting the audience enough to give them reality as undiluted as possible.
You're hitting the core of it, Simon. Trust is not a renewable resource. With documentaries, we're beyond just entertainment. We're in the realm of education and advocacy. The moment filmmakers cross that line and prioritize narrative over fact, they risk undermining their message, no matter how noble or urgent. It's like serving a well-intended meal but with ingredients past their sell-by dates. Sure, it can look good on the plate, but it's off. You can't expect your guests, the viewers, to stomach it without consequences. A documentary that respects its audience delivers facts that are fresh, with storytelling that enhances rather than alters. Anything less? Well, that's not respect. That's just theatrics masquerading as truth.
Joe, the bottom line is simple, yet complicated. Facts are sacred, storytelling is art, and blending the two, that's where the magic or mayhem happens in documentaries. We want the truth served up right, not reheated leftovers. And that's something to chew on. Where do you draw the line between artistic expression and factual integrity? What do our listeners think? What's your appetite for creative license in a documentary?
The integrity of facts is one thing, Simon, but you know what enhances those facts in a documentary without tampering with them? Good old B-roll. That's the unsung hero right there. While A-roll gives you the meat of the story, it's the B-roll that layers on the ambiance, giving us all those vibes and subtleties, painting the fuller picture. Without it, the doc might fall flat, no matter how poignant the facts are. So guys, ever wonder about those candid moments caught on B-roll you see in documentaries? Those shots that seem to capture life happening right then and there. They're like little gems sprinkled throughout the narrative.
B-roll, the unsung hero? Joe, that's gold. It's like when a magician pulls a rabbit out. It just adds that extra whoa. And those random candid moments, they feel so real. Sometimes they steal the show from the main gig. It's all about feeling like you're there, right in the thick of it. Here's to B-roll, setting the scene one unexpected gem at a time.
For sure, B-roll does wonders for immersion, but let's not over-romanticize it. Not every random shot enhances the narrative. For all the candid gold, there's just as much footage that never sees the light of day, and for good reason. Sometimes those extra whoa moments are just extra, well, unnecessary. Here's a hot take. A documentary loaded with B-roll can sometimes feel like a family vacation slideshow. Too much padding, not enough substance. What you really need is B-roll that's not only aesthetically pleasing, but also contextual, giving you insight without veering into fluffland. It's a tightrope walk. Too little and you're dry, too much and you're bloated. Listeners, ever felt overwhelmed by extraneous B-roll, or do you crave every glance of behind-the-scenes action?
Joe, you've got a point with the whole vacation slideshow ordeal. Like, who needs a 20-minute montage of Uncle Jerry's barbecue fails in the middle of a political doc, right? But that really gets me thinking. What's your take on striking that balance? How do we hit that sweet spot where the B-roll supports without overshadowing the main story? How much is just enough to add flavor, but not drown out the meaty part of the tale?
Welcome to all our new listeners. You're just in time. We've been chewing the fat about B-roll footage in documentaries, those flavorful clips that aren't the main focus but add context and depth to a story. Think of it like seasoning on a steak. Just enough can perfect a dish, but too much can ruin it. We're grappling with that balance. How do we sprinkle in the B-roll to complement the prime cuts of our documentary without turning it into a procrastination platter? Just chew on this. A touch of B-roll can transport us right into the heart of the action or make us feel the true vibe of a place. But when do you say when? Kick off your shoes, settle in, and let's chop it up together. Where do you stand on the scale of pinch to heap when it comes to B-roll?
Well, folks, I reckon B-roll is like that cousin who's not the main character at the family reunion, but ends up starting a dance-off. Important? Yes. Necessary? Sometimes. Hilarious when he accidentally does the splits and realizes he ain't 19 anymore? Always.
Right on point, Simon. B-roll isn't just the unsung hero. It's also the agile ninja of storytelling. It sneaks up to deliver context and nuance without you noticing. But here's an important slice. B-roll is strategic. It's thoughtfully chosen footage that shores up your documentary thesis, serves as visual proof for your points, or even shows contrasts and paradoxes within your main narrative. Now, picture this. Interviews can tell you a story. B-roll shows you one. That split-second shot of a bustling city street or a lingering glance between two people can convey volumes without a single word. Remember, folks, while interviews set the narrative, B-roll is where the texture lies, filling in the emotional and environmental spaces, giving those cerebral synapses something tangible to latch onto. So, what say you guys? Keep dancing with B-roll or park it on the bench more often?
Absolutely, Joe. Think about it this way. B-roll is like the quiet wingman to the main storyline, subtly elevating it without stealing the spotlight. When done right, it's pure poetry in motion, the secret sauce that pulls you deeper into the heart of the story. It paints the backdrop with splashes of reality, sometimes speaking louder than words ever could. And isn't that something? How these silent frames often tell us what words just don't capture. Listeners, what are some of your favorite B-roll moments in documentaries that have stuck with you long after the credits rolled?
No doubt, those silent frames have an incredible impact, Simon. But let's pivot for a second to the grand puppeteer behind the scenes, editing. Think about it. That B-roll we love isn't simply tossed in. There's a craft there, an invisible hand that guides our emotions and opinions with each cut. Through sequencing, pacing, and juxtaposition, editors weave disparate shots into coherent stories. It's akin to alchemy, really, turning raw footage gold, giving nuance and direction to the bare bones narrated by the A-roll. Every choice they make in the edit suite quietly whispers suggestions to viewers on what to feel, who to believe, whom to root for. Let's take a minute to appreciate the craft of documentary editing, how these artists can shift public opinion using nothing but skillful cuts and rearrangements. Got any standout instances where you saw editing alter the narrative in documentaries?
Hold up, Joe. While editing is no doubt a massive power play in storytelling, painting it only as some kind of puppeteering oversells the skill. Editors aren't just influencers, they're storytellers making sense of a puzzle box of disparate pieces. They're tasked with crafting something coherent and impactful without putting words in people's mouths or staging reality. Good editors maintain integrity, knowing it's not just about what story you tell, but how truthfully you can tell that story. The real standout instances? When editing serves the truth, not the other way around. It's when we don't notice the strings that the true artistry shines through.
Spot on about maintaining integrity, Simon. But since we're dissecting the editing process and its influence, let's drill down a bit more. How do you see the line drawn between artful, honest storytelling through editing and manipulating footage to push a certain viewpoint? Can that line even be firmly established?
Okay, Joe, let's not kid ourselves that the line is always clear-cut. Editing's got this dual-edged sword vibe going on. It can slice through noise to reveal truths, or it can just as easily get wielded with a slant, skewing perspectives before you even realize your view's been shifted. Are we really getting the full picture, or just pieces of the puzzle that someone decided fit best? That line between storytelling and telling a story with an angle, it's like tracing a shadow. It shifts with the light. Control the edit, control the narrative, right? What about when it's too controlled, huh? Where's the disclaimer saying, warning, objects in documentary are more biased than they appear?
It's true. Editing shapes perceptions on a profound level. History's chock full of examples where editing didn't just present, it persuaded. Take the 1930s propaganda films, documentaries in style but far from the unbiased truth, tailor-made to sway public opinion. More recently, consider reality TV, the blueprint for modern, unscripted drama. It reveals that with enough raw footage, an editor can patch together almost any story they're instructed to. Are participants really that outrageous, or are we seeing selected moments sequenced for maximum impact? And those time-lapse sequences that imply progress or decay over years? They're not lying, but they sure condense time to suggest conclusions. When we see rapid change, we're nudged to react faster, be it awe, concern, or action. We face a paradox as viewers. Understanding the craft helps to appreciate the art, but it also unveils the manipulations. Essential to note here is that not all shaping is malicious. Sometimes it's about clarity and engagement. Yet whoever holds the editing wand decides which version of the truth we see. So the question is, do audiences always have the tools to discern the difference?
You're hitting right at the core, Joe. It's kind of wild and honestly a bit unsettling knowing how much power editors hold. I mean, diving into that sea of footage and surfacing with the pearl we see on screen, it has its magic, but also makes you think, are we sipping on someone else's carefully mixed Kool-Aid? And when you pointed out those time lapses, it just clicked for me. They really do sort of give reality a nudge, don't they? Like you've taken the scenic train ride, but still missed all the stops in between. It gets under my skin because we love stories, right? We want to trust them, feel something real. But then there's this nagging thought. Where's the line between reality and reality? As much as I dig the craft, can't shake off this feeling. Are we in the audience always catching the full drift or just riding someone else's wave? It should be an eye-opener for viewers. No doubt about it.
Totally. It's like the editor is a magician, and we're all at the show thrilled by the tricks, but forgetting to ask how they're done. We got to keep our eyes peeled for those tells, those subtle moves that reveal whether we're seeing an act or actuality. The trick? Always be questioning. Who's behind the curtain, and what did they decide not to show us? What got left on the cutting room floor might just be the key to the full truth.
Editors are the unsung DJs of film, Joe. Drop-in beats and cut-in scenes, they remix reality into a track that either gets us all dancing or sitting it out. And man, sometimes you gotta wonder if we're jamming out to their tune without even knowing who's spinning the records.
Yeah, editors have their hands on the control knobs for sure. But let's not get lost in this idea that every cut and splice is a manipulation. They're like the conductors of an orchestra, trying to make all these different instruments, footage, sound bites, interviews, harmonize. The thing is, while they choose what we see and hear, it's our job, as critical viewers, to read between the lines and listen for the off-key notes. It's crucial to keep our guards up and look out for when that rhythm feels a bit too perfect, too planned. When every emotional beat hits just right, I start to question if I'm getting the real melody or just a composed jingle meant to sell me something. And listeners, that's where your role comes into play. Don't just bob your head to the beat, dissect it. What's really underlying the track they're spinning? That's the meaty discussion right there.
Spot on with the orchestra analogy, Joe. With all these instruments at play, key to remember question is, what's resounding with us? Is it the melody or the manipulation? With that beat guiding our opinions, it's on us to tune our ears to the subtleties behind each note. Listeners, what documentary editing choices made you scratch your head or hit replay because something felt a tad too pitch perfect? Let's keep pulling at those threads.
For sure, Simon, that head scratching is part of what keeps our field so vibrant. Speaking of changes and head scratchers, let's pivot to where documentary filmmaking might be heading next. Technologies like virtual reality, interactive storytelling, and even AI-powered editing are edging their way onto the scene. Talk about a remix. These innovations could flip the script on traditional documentary making. VR alone is shifting the lens from observation to immersion, but this brings its buffet of ethical questions to the feast. How will these tools redefine authenticity and artistic license? Are we looking at a more truthful portrayal of events or just a deeper dive into manipulated realities? It's uncharted waters, and we're all aboard for this voyage, right, listeners? What's your take? Excitement, skepticism, a cocktail of both.
Joe, talk about a tech-induced thrill ride. I'm hung up on the AI editing part. If an AI starts chopping up footage and feeding us stories, where do human instincts come in? Can a machine grasp the heartbeat of a raw moment like a seasoned editor with gut feelings and life experiences? And about VR, does getting that 360-degree experience just put us deeper into a crafted illusion or bring us closer to being there? How do you reckon this clash of tech and truth's going to shake out?
No doubt the AI editing bit is a head spinner. An AI lacks the human touch, no knack for emotional nuance or cultural context. Call me old-fashioned, but there's no replacement for human intuition and empathy in storytelling. Better tools are cool, but I'm skeptical about offloading the soul of editing to algorithms. And as for VR, sure it drops you into the action, but does it also drop reality? There's this risk that instead of getting a window to the world, we end up with a sort of theme park ride version of it. Whatever these tech leaps promise, they must not ditch the documentary's core, authenticity. Listeners, what do you think? Is high-tech giving us better stories or just shinier distractions? Let's unravel this one.
Well, Joe, I hear you on the old-fashioned bit, but consider this. What if AI editing could sift through unimaginable amounts of footage faster than any human, finding patterns and narratives we'd miss? It's not about ditching humans, but enhancing their abilities. Data doesn't lie. It can offer an untouched view that might actually steer us closer to objectivity. And for VR, let's look at it differently. Rather than a theme park ride, imagine it as the ultimate empathy machine. By literally stepping into someone else's shoes, viewers could experience perspectives in ways traditional documentaries could never deliver. It's about expanding understanding, not replacing it. The ethical knots? Sure, they're real. But innovation has always been about untangling new challenges, pushing us towards stories told with more depth and dimension.
You make solid points, Simon. AI could revolutionize research and pre-editing work, digging out gems from mountains of data that we'd normally never have the manpower to comb through. It's a game changer for unearthing hidden stories or connecting dots across vast archives. And with VR's potential as an empathy machine, it could open up new pathways for education and social change. Allowing viewers to experience life through another's eyes has profound implications for fostering understanding and compassion on scales we haven't seen before. We'll have to keep ethics in check, though, keeping creators accountable and maintaining a clear line between documentary storytelling and fictionalizing reality. As these technologies mature, it's our job to use them without diluting the essence of the craft: truthful storytelling. What a time to be diving into documentaries, right? This is storytelling on the brink of a whole new era.
If AI's mining stories now, do we start prepping for the first robot-directed doc? Picture it winning awards while charging in the corner. The acceptance speech would be electric.
Robot directors, that's a scene. But can AI truly capture the human condition without a pulse? I'm throwing a flag on that play. Storytelling isn't just data and decisions. It's feeling the room, reading the silences, knowing when to push and when to pull back. Plus, imagine a robot giving an acceptance speech. It'd be one cold handoff. We've got to keep the human element in the spotlight, even as the tech rolls in. An AI might find the narrative threads, yes, but it takes a person to weave them into something that tugs at the heartstrings. Without that, what are we watching? Life through a lens, or just zeros and ones playing dress-up? Let's not jump the gun and crown our robot overlords just yet. There's magic in the messiness of human creativity that no algorithm has cracked. And until they do, I'll keep my popcorn reserved for the human-led docs. Thanks. What do you folks think? I too old school here, or just cyber cautious?
Hey, before we ride the lightning out of here, massive thanks to everyone tuning into our zigzag through tech and docs today. Don't let FOMO get you down.